This is Fit to Succeed in partnership with NordicFitnessEducation.com with hosts Ben Pratt. Thanks for joining us.
Has the learner achieved the learning outcomes? Can they perform? Do they have the skills, the competencies, the knowledge to work as a personal trainer in that occupational role? And if they can show effectively that they can do that, how they made that journey becomes a little bit of an irrelevance.
Hello and welcome to another podcast, and our expert interview today is going to be with Julian Berriman. Julian is the Director of the Professional Standards Committee for Europe Active. Julian, it's so great to have you with us. Welcome.
Yeah, good to be here, Ben. Good to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Now, today I wanted to cover quite a range of things. In particular, I want to give the listeners a little bit of an introduction to you and your background. So we'll talk a little about your career, but then later we're going to look more specifically at the ways in which Europe Active as an organization are influencing the health and fitness industry on a larger scale. So first of all, let's begin by talking about your beginning within the health and fitness industry. So prior to entering this industry, I know that you worked within the UK government system as a civil servant. What motivated you to change your career from that more office-based environment into the world of fitness?
Okay, I've never been asked that question before, Ben, in 25, 30 years in the industry, so that's a doozy. I was in the civil service. I did a sports degree, a BA honours in sport and recreation. And I came out and tried to find a job in the industry, but really nothing was appealing to me greatly. I wanted to move to London, and hence I ended up in a civil service role. I did quite well in that role, and I ended up being working in the Home Secretary's private office, which was providing briefing for the Home Secretary, for questions in the House, and providing briefing for the Prime Minister, actually. So it was interesting, but it was office-based, and it was in a city environment. Wasn't really me. I wanted to get back into the world of health and fitness and do something that I was trained to do. So I think what actually happened was I was watching a local station in London, and they were talking about this thing called a personal trainer. This was back in the early 90s, I guess, and they were talking about a personal trainer, and they had a little overview on what this guy did, and I'd never heard of a personal trainer. And at that point, I thought, hey, that could be for me. That's exactly what I want to do. It's working in health and fitness. I wanted to do something more hands-on. I didn't necessarily want to be a manager in a sports centre watching other people keep fit. I wanted to get involved, and this role seemed ideal. So I immediately sought out a relevant course. All right. And at that point, changed my life. I gave up. I resigned from the civil service the next week. I did a bit of window cleaning in between doing my moving from the office environment to my personal training course. And went and did the course.
Oh wow, that's interesting. So it was actually something that spurred you outside that then motivated you to say, I need to change. I'm not happy with where I'm at right now.
Absolutely, yeah. So big life decision, and wandering around the streets of London at times, thinking, have I done the right thing? But it was a big move for me and my family, but it worked. I got in on the ground level of what was to be a huge and prosperous industry.
All right, fantastic. And obviously here you still are working in this industry 20 plus years later. So it was obviously a good move for you at that time.
Yeah,
now,
indeed.
You've worked in a lot of different roles, and I don't specifically want to get into the ins and outs of every single role you've been in, but if you were to offer some means of summary as to what the experience of being a personal trainer and a sports therapist has been like for you, what things come to your mind?
Well, I guess for me, I, as you know, have been very involved in the therapy side and personal training too, but very much in trying to perhaps bridge a gap or bridge that gap between personal training and the therapy world. So what always interested me greatly was working with people around the postural correction side of things, looking at static posture. This is something I would do in a therapeutic or in a clinical situation, but also in the personal training environment. So I guess the birth of that, we can call it functional training, if you like, which really incorporated those aspects of static and dynamic posture, postural analysis, those kinds of things, fitted me perfectly. And that's where I really focus my efforts, and where I guess my expertise developed. And I used that in both environments, both in the fitness world, but also in the therapy world as well.
Oh, fantastic.
And still do.
Yeah, fantastic. I'd really like to touch on that because in terms of functional training, if we look at the ACSM's 2018 trends for fitness, which they produce every year, functional training is still in the top 10, and it's been it's been in the top 10 for a long time. Now, I understand that you were one of, in my opinion anyway, one of the early adopters of functional training, and perhaps at the turn of the millennium, you were already getting involved in this world of functional training, perhaps ahead of the curve to some degree.
I think so.
What was it that, what or how did you originally get into the world of functional fitness training?
Well, I guess, I was working in Premier Training International, training provider in the UK, as you know, and I was the research and development guy, research and development director, and, we were starting to see more information around this thing called functional training. And if I'm honest, a lot of that stuff was coming across from the US. So there were some companies who were heavily involved in that. There was very much the prominence of PT on the net at that time, that online resource. And also, I think the NASM were doing some great things around that sort of postural analysis piece and taking that into functional training, movement patterns. We had Paul Check with movement patterns, pulling, pushing, rotating, all of those new concepts that were coming through. And I guess Premier, and as a research and development director, I was becoming increasingly aware of that and knew that we had to take that on board and incorporate that in the education that we were providing, both within our personal training education, but also in sort of continuing education, CPD, lifelong learning type products.
And what sort of timeline, just for the listeners, what years are we talking about here that you started to get into this?
I guess that would have been early 2000s. So I guess we're 2001, 2002, something like that. We actually, at the time, I was involved with another guy you know very well, Jason Anderson, and we produced a box set, a course that could be taken at home, which was called Resisted Movement Training, and that was very much about incorporating those functional concepts. So there was a lot of stuff in there in terms of that postural analysis, but then incorporating that into a prescribed program of functional training. So I think some good stuff at that time.
Oh, I remember I was going to say taking the resisted movement training course in 2003, and it totally changed my thought processes of how I was going to apply training. And so I express thanks to you and Jason for putting that great course together, because it changed the way I looked at fitness and movement, which was good.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was a great time. There was a few trips to the States to promote it and stuff, and we learned a lot in that time. Maybe a little bit naive in some aspects, but still. You felt that you were being quite pioneering, which is always a good feeling.
Yeah, exciting. Now, you used the word pioneer, and that kind of spurred me as to the direction we're going to kind of go with this, because early in your career, and not in your working career, but in your fitness career, you, I suppose, took the choice to join what was a pioneering company at the time, which was Premier Training. They were in their early days, and you began working as a fitness tutor. What was your experience like in the classroom with students? How did you find that process?
Incredible. Actually, it was, I don't know, I think we all go through life trying to find that thing that maybe maybe we're good at and that we're comfortable with. And for me, I hadn't really, until that point, discovered lecturing, presenting and talking to people. And Premier was really the introduction to that. So I found that experience a huge confidence boost for me personally in my career, etc., because I got great feedback from the students. I enjoyed the experience myself. I loved that interaction with the students. We had the students at that time for the Premier Diploma. When I first got involved in it, it involved both the fitness aspects, fitness instruction, personal training, but also some therapy aspects, sports massage, sports therapy, these kinds of things. So we had the students with us. I forget now. I think at the beginning it was 14 weeks.
All right. Wow.
Solid. So that was the diploma. So it was a fairly intense experience. But obviously, you really built a relationship with those students. You were able to bring them through from, in some cases, quite little knowledge to, quite a rounded individual. And I felt we were sending them out into the industry with the skills, the knowledge, and the competencies that they needed to be successful. And I think the success of Premier training in the marketplace is proof to that. Really, I think that they really were seen at that time as the main training provider, and I think a lot of people took a lot of the stuff that we did and developed and improved it. But I think it was a very positive thing for the industry that we had the Premier Diploma.
Indeed. Now, you mentioned there that originally it was a full-time 14-week diploma, and over the years, not just within Premier Training, but within lots of other training providers in the UK and beyond, that model, that idea of a long full-time process has changed a lot into much shorter 4- and 6-week courses, online courses, distance learning, face-to-face. There's a huge variety of ways in which people now train. Now, with your experience and your understanding of the industry from then right through to now, how have the skills or the demands of our industry changed that is required by the modern day personal trainer?
Sure. Well, I guess there's a lot in that question actually, Ben. There's two sides, isn't there? The different ways of imparting learning, and we know that things are changing. There's a lot of innovation. There's the growth of online training. It's really interesting that we're having this conversation at this time because, as you know, I'm in Iceland at the moment with Keela training, and they're just telling me about some of the innovation that they have around this area. So innovation in terms of the classroom and that classroom experience, making it a lot less formal experience, so that the classroom is a place where students work together. And the tutor is just there as a facilitator. So lots of innovative thinking around that, and lots of innovative thinking around the online side of things. I think quite often in our industry, and I've been guilty of this as well, that you hear the phrase online and you can think, oh, well, this is in some way a reduction in standards. You can't learn online what you can learn in the classroom, etc. This intrinsically has got to be a negative thing for the learning experience, or sometimes it gets portrayed in that way. But I'm certainly learning that I don't think that's the case at all. I think we have to work with this medium. I think it can be hugely beneficial. That traditional classroom experience maybe now is looking a little dated, and I think if we're going to cater to all learning styles and all the needs of our students, then we need to embrace it and work with it. And it's good to see that training providers are doing that. So, but on that point, and I'll get on to the personal training point in a minute, but on the point of face-to-face learning or online learning or whatever, ultimately, I believe that what is important at the end of training is the learning outcomes. So we can look at the inputs, what college did you go to, what university, what school, the time, the learning hours, guided learning, total qualification time, all these different aspects. But ultimately, has the learner achieved the learning outcomes? Can they perform? Do they have the skills, the competencies, the knowledge to work as a personal trainer in that occupational role? And if they can show effectively that they can do that, how they made that journey becomes a little bit of an irrelevance. What it does underline, of course, is that it's really important that when we're looking at those learning outcomes, we are robust in the way that we assess and evaluate whether that individual has actually achieved those skills, knowledge, and competencies. So it puts more emphasis on that, the end of that road, that you need to be convinced, you need to be able to quality assure that that person does actually meet those learning outcomes.
Of course.
But I think if you take that view, it then allows us to embrace all sorts of different learning environments and mediums.
Okay, so if I summarize that before you go on to the second point, was you're basically saying however the individual learns, the key is that when they step into the gym or into the fitness environment, they have the skills necessary to train their clients appropriately, and that has been checked and verified and assessed by an expert who can say that they are skilled enough to meet the demands of the modern day personal trainer.
Yeah, it's all about the ability to perform the occupational role. Do they have the ability to do that? Are they safe? Are they effective?
Indeed. So then, on the flip side of that, or following on from that, how have you seen that role change over the last couple of decades?
Okay. Yeah. So I guess the personal trainer role. When we have events, Europe Active have various events, and then we get feedback from our training providers, from employers, etc., and from the industry. Then they tell us whether they feel the skills gaps are, and generally the feedback that we get is there's a feeling that with the knowledge side of things, maybe the A&P, those knowledge aspects, there's a general level of the training provided is pretty good. The program design stuff maybe has changed a little bit over the years. You've talked about functional training, so there's been innovations there, whereas it was a very traditional approach previously, based largely around those sort of hypertrophy bodybuilding kind of principles and the training systems that would support those sort of systems. That's where we were in terms of personal training, but obviously a lot more now in terms of functional training and working with movement patterns, as I suggested, full body kind of stuff, but integrating that with a traditional approach. So lots of alternatives now in terms of program design. So there's been a development there in terms of those technical skills, and that's reflected, isn't it, in the environment that personal trainers now work in. I've been in some gyms over here in Iceland over the last day or so, and they all have wonderful functional areas with great bits of kit. You just want to get on and give it a go. Clearly, that then means the personal trainer has to have the familiarity with all of those pieces of equipment and be able to impart the correct technique, etc., to their clients. So we've seen changes in terms of program design, but I think what the employers would tell us is that for sure is that what they often lack in the personal trainer coming to them from training courses are the skills, those softer skills, those communication skills, behavioral management type skills that they would like the personal trainer to possess. The ability to communicate effectively with their clients, to be able to empathize with them and bring the best out of them. And also within that, communication skills, but also business skills. So, for example, the ability, and I hate to use the word, the ability to sell and to get clients. So, it tends to be as soon as you use that sell word, everybody thinks, oh, I don't want to do that. It's a hard sell situation. Don't want to be there. But I think what I'm discovering over the years is, having written courses in communication skills around motivational interviewing, taking ideas from cognitive behavioral therapy and all these kind of wonderful areas that can teach us how to communicate with people in an effective way, how to put them, give them a sense of control in terms of their personal training or whatever that might be. As well as having those skills. When you look at the sales skills, a lot of the sales skills relate very closely to the behavioral management skills. the ability to promote your services, the ability to get people to come and do your programs often relate to how effectively you can communicate with people. And that isn't about a hard sell. It's about using some of those skills that you've learned in your behavioral management bit of your PT education and applying them in a slightly more business orientated way. So there is crossover between those two things.
Interesting.
But I think that's certainly what the feedback that we get from the industry, and we do consult quite widely with the industry, that the personal trainer needs to be more aware of the communication side, and they need to be more attuned to the business side, and this may be why there is quite a high turnover generally of personal trainers, because they may have the technical skills, but then they lack those other, what they might see initially as more peripheral skills, but actually are central to their role.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. It doesn't matter how good you can program a client if you can't get the client to commit to you by buying into personal training in the first place. So like you said, communication in business precedes the ability to show off your technical skills in program design and exercise. So yes. I understand that. Now, you've kind of been an innovator. We talked already about you being one of the early adopters of functional training. I know in the UK market, you were also the author of the very first exercise and low back pain course. You were an innovator there. And here you are now working in Europe Active as the Director of Professional Standards, trying to innovate, change, and move things forward. Yep. Particularly, as you said, with things like behavior, soft skills, and the like. What would you say during the last 3 years that you've served as the director at Europe Active has been your greatest challenge?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, obviously it is a big challenge. We're trying to affect the whole of Europe here, and there's lots of different systems within different countries, and some countries are more open to a collaboration with Europe Active and with the European situation more generally than others. You have to address each of those situations individually. You have to get to know what is that national system. We would always at Europe Active have reference within education to the national situation. We're not here to usurp that national situation. We're here to support it and to work with it. What we're trying to do, obviously, is to have that situation where there is a commonality around Europe, so that when people want to move around Europe in their occupation, they want opportunities outside their own country, that there is that standard, and everybody can say, well, you're a level 4 personal trainer as recognized by Europe Active and in your own country. And therefore you can come and work in our country because we recognize all of that. And that's the ultimate goal, is to achieve that commonality across Europe, that transferability of qualifications. And we're getting there. I mean, the European standards are extremely well recognized, and I feel that there is a genuine momentum gathering and an impetus behind this. I think that is evidenced by one of my biggest challenges, which is to get more training providers to work with us, to work with our standards. Obviously, a training provider using our standards, they're then training students that are going out into the industry, trained against the European standards. We know that they have the quality that we would require, that they've attained a sufficient standard. So one of my biggest challenges was to get in there and say, look, training providers, this is of real value for you. You need to put yourself through this process. We have an accreditation process. So a training provider who wants to be accredited with Europe Active says, okay, I would like to have that stamp. I'd like to be able to use your logos to be in your community of training providers. We then send in a verification team to look at their systems, their content, their methods of delivery, their assessment processes, and decide whether they reach our standards. Are they covering the various learning outcomes within the standards that they're using or they're picking up, like our PT standards? And I guess that's been a big challenge to get more training providers to do that. If we had 1,000 training providers across Europe, clearly we're in an extremely strong position and everybody would start to fully recognize our standards. We're currently at, when I came in, I think we we were less than 100 training providers. We're now over 130 training providers, and the message is spreading, and we're getting more and more applications every day. So, so that's been a challenge.
How many countries, Julian, are actually have a training provider that accepts and works to the standards? How many nations in Europe are we operating in?
Well, hey, I would put a figure. I don't know the exact figure, but I would let's say of the 28 member states, you're upwards of 20.
All right, so the majority.
Yeah, the majority, for sure, the majority. And the point being that to go on, the next big challenge is that we also run the European Register of Exercise Professionals, and clearly we want to build the membership of that. That's a register for personal trainers who have reached the standard. We can assure ourselves that they have reached that standard. Maybe they've come through one of our accredited providers, or they have other qualifications that we would say, okay, we would recognize that. But the other challenge is to build those EREPS members, and by having 20 coverage across Europe, over 20 countries, then we're going to achieve that. So it's building.
Okay, now in considering the time that you've served as director, is there one or two highlights in your experience over the last 2.5 years that you think, oh, I particularly enjoyed that, or that was a real breakthrough for us as an organization?
Yeah, well, in terms of enjoyment, then there've been many occasions. I've been hosted in some wonderful countries, and always treated treated well and with great respect. So I've had some wonderful experiences, and I've been to some fairly remote places. All right. Iceland is a good, maybe a good example of that. But I guess in all of those, I mean, I'm thinking I was invited by a training provider in Italy, ELAV, to quite a remote part of Italy, and I find myself in a little Italian village giving a presentation and being wined and dined, and wonderful hospitality. So there's been some great experiences, but I think for me, the main thing there is that, hey, I was very involved in the UK industry, and that was great, and I had my time there. I'm now involved with Europe Active, but it feels like throughout that experience, my sort of central goal has been to improve the quality of what we do as an industry on the basis of sound education for our workforce. And so I guess I feel, again, back to that word of trying to sort of pioneer something a little bit, when I'm visiting some new country to help them to build their industry, to set up the appropriate systems, that's a wonderful feeling. You feel that you're helping people, but you're also spreading that message. And I mean, and on that point as well, of course, increasingly as the reputation of Europe Active grows, we're getting a lot of interest from beyond Europe. All right, so I find myself stepping out of Europe and helping other countries. I was recently in Saudi Arabia, for instance, and there's been interest elsewhere. To set up systems of accreditation for training providers, registers for exercise professionals, to reference against our European standards. So in a industry, a fitness industry like that, where it's very much in its infancy, it's great to be able to get in on the ground level and to give that sort of support.
Oh, fantastic. So it sounds like the people recognize the value of having a profession that has a system of maintaining quality and standard. If people are starting to see that and inquire and ask for assistance of Europe Active, that message must be spreading.
Yeah, I certainly feel it is, and I mean, go back to that training. It's all about quality assurance, but it's all about either the individual or the organization, like a training provider or an employer, almost subjecting themselves to a process of due diligence. So, when you're involved with Europe Active, we come and look at your training systems. If you're an EREPS member, we validate your qualifications and we say, look, you have met the necessary standards. So for any professional person or professional organization, that's got to be a worthwhile exercise to put yourself through.
For sure.
In terms of the other part of your question, where you said that have a breakthrough moment. Well, I guess I've had many sort of thoughts and ideas, which I think, okay, that takes me to the next level, or that's the next step. I think for me, I don't think there's been a magic moment like that. It's really been more based on putting effective systems and processes in place. So we had a fantastic set of European standards for personal trainer, fitness instructor, which have been developed by a fantastic team, my professional standards committee, in consultation across the industry. So those standards are the heartbeat of everything we do, and they're fantastic. I know you're familiar with them, Ben, and they're extremely comprehensive. And whenever I get other people, experts, to look at those standards, are always extremely impressed with them. So, so the standards were there, and the people that put them together, stakeholders across Europe, employers, training providers, individuals, great. But what I think I've been more about is about putting effective systems for accreditation, quality assurance, the management of all of those processes. So
to make sure
we now have a verification team, which is, you know, upwards of 10 people strong, where it was 1 or 2 people. Those people are all highly qualified verifiers, so we're able to deal with things much more effectively. Yeah, and I think that's been the reason for the growth. Mm-hmm. There are some now that we have a good foundation, there are some other opportunities now presenting themselves.
Mm-hmm. And so what you're saying is that you have put in place the ability to check on the training provision of your recognized providers, that they are actually delivering their courses to the level that is required, even after they gain their initial accreditation.
Yeah, so that's what my function here is a lot about. It's about quality assurance. You know, if you're going to give somebody that endorsement, that stamp, then, you know, there's got to be vigorous and consistent processes in place to make sure that everything is happening as it should be.
All right, fantastic. Now, Julian, we're almost coming up on time. I just want to ask 1 or 2 quick final questions. Recently, you introduced a program of lifelong learning into the Europe active scene. I wonder if you could briefly just outline what that is for listeners, so those who are already qualified as trainers know what is anticipated. And then I've got one final short question. So
okay, I look forward to that. Okay, I'll step back because you're losing my head there again. Yes, so lifelong learning. So for lifelong learning, maybe read continuing education, continuing professional development, whatever you want to call it. But it's very important that we establish the principle as an industry of lifelong learning, that your learning doesn't stop the moment you're qualified as a personal trainer, that you have to carry on learning, improving, developing as an individual. You need to reflect on your practice. You need to look at what you're doing. How can I improve that situation? How can I better myself? So we need to instill that principle in our EREPS members and across the industry. So we're currently accrediting courses against our standards, but obviously there are a lot of courses out there that sit outside of our standards, which would fall into that continuing education bracket. Mm-hmm. So that might be a course in kettlebells or some other aspect of functional training, mm-hmm. or a development of nutrition or whatever. Sure. And we currently don't have or didn't have the system to look at those courses, look at the content, look at the delivery, and approve those courses. Again, about quality assurance, right, Ben? So now we have put in place that system where training providers can bring us their continuing education courses, and we will approve those courses. We will look at them and say yes or no in terms of whether we will approve them under the EREPS lifelong learning program. So we have that, and then for the individual EREPS member, we're requiring them, it's not a particularly onerous requirement, to complete 10 hours of lifelong learning on an annual basis, and to show us, to record on our website what they have actually done.
All right, so that could be
and also some reflective practice in there.
Mm-hmm. So that could be 1 or 2 short courses during a year.
Indeed, and my experience is that most exercise professionals that, are passionate about what they do. And let's face it, this is an industry where people who get involved generally are quite passionate about what they do. That they're already doing a lot of this stuff anyway. A lot of them are attending courses and doing their own research, etc., etc. So in those cases, it would simply be a matter of recording what they're already doing. And we are not saying, I need to stress as well, that because this is a European system we're trying to establish here, we're not just saying that you can only do courses that are approved by us in order to fulfill your lifelong learning hours.
Sure.
Those courses that are approved by us, you as an individual can take the assurance that they've been through a quality assurance process, so you know that they are going to be, it's going to be a good course.
Sure.
It's going to be well delivered and well assessed. So it's just marking that up, and that obviously gives training providers some advantage in being able to say, well, look, we've been through that approval process.
Indeed.
But we would also look at other learning that the individual might have done with a training provider that doesn't necessarily have their course approved, or they've read some research, etc., etc. At this stage, it's about trying to establish this very important principle of the importance of ongoing learning.
Well, that's great to hear, and I'd point out that we're going to take advantage of that approval system ourselves. We here at Nordic Fitness Education, we have the plan for 1 or 2 short upcoming continuing education courses that we intend to put through the approval process and hopefully offer those out to the public. So
great, yeah, and it's I don't think there will be any shortage of people wanting to put their courses through. We're getting a certain amount of pressure to get that done.
All right, wonderful. Now here's the last question then. Obviously, you've had over 2 decades of experience now in the industry. If you had the gift of being able to go back in time to when you first started in the fitness industry, and you could offer yourself one piece of advice, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
Ooh, that is a toughie, isn't it? What would I tell myself? Do you know what? I think I did make a lot of good decisions. I think maybe out of luck a lot of times that I made those decisions, and so I don't look back and think, oh, I regret that, or I regret, because everything went pretty well. But I think if I was to give myself a piece of advice, and what worked well for me always was in this industry, to be as open as possible, try to be as humble as possible in what you do, because it is an industry quite often filled with egos. To tread a middle line, to take advice and be open to that advice. And I think that's probably a good way to be in any profession. Be consultative. And I guess in this role that I currently am, we don't move forward unless we consult with the industry. So in that sense, it sort of suits me. It suits me very well that I enjoy communicating with people. And I guess there it is, isn't it, Ben? Really, that's what the industry is crying out for: personal trainers who can communicate better. Because they can get the most out of their clients. They might get more clients. And I guess that's been the basis for me of my success, is that I've learned to be, I feel, a good communicator. So I guess that would be my advice to anybody out there. If you can work on those communication skills, if you can improve the way you present yourself to people, if you can put yourself at times in situations that are uncomfortable for you, because the only way that we move forward as individuals and collectively is if we face up to some pretty stiff challenges that are out there. And I've found myself in situations where I've got to go and present something in a very scary situation to a load of very eminent people, perhaps, and I really don't want to go and do it, but I force myself to do it. And then the next time I do it better. and I learn, and then it becomes second nature. So yeah, maybe put yourself in those challenging situations.
I think that's great advice. To move forward, we've got to get out of our comfort zone. I mean, that's what we teach our clients every single day. You've got to work just that bit harder than you did last workout in order to progress. But the same can be said of our own goals within our fitness career. So, Julian, it's been such a pleasure having you and to have some time to discuss. I appreciate all your comments, and we wish you a great day.
All right, lovely. Thanks, Ben. Great to talk to you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share via social media. You can also rate the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. If you'd like to know more about us, then check out our range of online courses at www.nordicfitnesseducation.com.